Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the podcast for entrepreneurs and business leaders to help unlock more productivity and creativity so you get a better business. Missing your sales targets, wanting to get more sales is a common issue in many businesses. And in today's episode, I'm interviewing Steve Catchick, a communication and customer experience expert who helps companies develop the secret sales force, which can unlock more sales in your firm. One of the subjects that came up in discussion with Steve was empowerment. And that's something which a couple of clients have had a long discussion with me about this week. So I thought I'd start off by talking about empowerment and introverts. Leaders and business owners often say to me that their staff don't go the extra mile, or if only they did a bit more than simply what they asked. Perhaps you've thought that yourself. And interestingly, I've heard it even more of staff who leaders accuse of being introverted. As ever, if you'd like to talk to me about issues raised in today's podcast or others relating to introverts, please visit introvertinbusiness.co.uk. So I'm going to share a couple of tips on empowerment, especially empowering the introverts in your team. But what is empowerment? In simple terms, it's giving authority or power to someone to do something. And of course, the aim is normally that in doing that, the person will feel more engaged and satisfied, and that your firm will get more work done overall, and perhaps become more resilient as more than one person can do something. A study recently found that only 4% of employees are willing to give extra effort when empowerment is low, but 2/3 are willing when empowerment is high. And there's a difference between being empowered and feeling empowered. I might be incredibly happy for you to take a risk, but if you don't feel it or believe that I am, you won't take that risk, especially if you think I'll complain at the results. So where does it go wrong? Number one is quite often status. Some people worry that power and status are diminished if others are doing the things that I used to do. Micromanagement, the manager who checks every small part of the task all of the time. Low trust, if your team don't trust your motives or your response when things go badly, empowerment's going to be really hard to achieve. And what's different about empowering introverts? The reality is that people need approaching in a way that's meaningful for them. If you're to get the best performance and leave them feeling empowered, they've got to feel it. And in that respect, introverts are no different. But understanding your team by labels would be a good start, because introverts will react differently to some things than extroverts. That information could change your approach. So let's look at a couple of tips for empowering your team. Number one, always boundaries. Define the boundaries within which an employee can make her decisions. This gives them freedom to act, and is especially true of introverts who prefer to work in a structured environment. Boundaries don't restrict team members, they empower them. Feeling valued. How do you make your team feel valued? And do you act differently with introverts and extroverts on that subject? And finally, I worked with 2 different ski instructors this year. One was great at telling me what was wrong. The other one pointed out the same things, because a week later I had the same problems, but presented them in smaller doses, praised progress on them, and got me to think through how I might change what I was doing. Where do you think I felt more supported? Where do you think I thought the guy has my back and I'm willing to go out on a limb? You're absolutely right. So make sure people think you're supportive rather than critical. There's lots more tips that I could offer you, but I really wanted to go on and catch up with Steve from the Secret Sales Force. Hello, Steve. Welcome to the podcast. Tell me, what is the Secret Sales Force? Or do you have to kill me if you tell me?
No, that's an interesting thought. I've often wondered about getting a James Bond style logo, but no, I haven't. Customer experience covers a huge range. The secret sales force is focusing on one element of it. Every interaction is a moment of truth. And it's moments of truth that make up the customer experience. But the biggest impact on prospects, on customers, and on others is the people interactions. The secret sales force is about developing those people interactions to give magical moments of truth that give a wonderful experience.
With a focus on those moments of truth, that's going to increase customer service and increase sales, and that's where you're coming from.
Yes.
And how does this overlay with the theme about introverts and extroverts? Because I guess there's a couple of things going on. Many introverts don't like selling or being perceived as salesy. And I guess in many organizations, if you've got an introvert being managed by somebody not necessarily well, that probably doesn't lead to them delivering great moments of truth.
Introverts or extroverts, I don't think that matters as much in this, because the moments of truth is about the person. How engaged are they with you when they're communicating with you? Do they leave you feeling they were interested in me? And I think that's a difference. Who it says that rather you need to be interested in someone, not be interesting. And it's the focus on the other person. I'll give an example, John. I was down doing some work in Brighton and I stayed at a travel lodge. You don't associate travel lodge with the same prestige as five-star hotels. But the moment I arrived there, John, who was on the desk, he just made me feel so welcome. He was jovial. He answered the questions I was going to ask before I asked them. He even knew who I was. And I didn't think Travelodge could do that, but he knew who I was. He immediately said if I didn't, there are plenty of nice pubs and you could go here or there. A few little touches that made me feel, you know what, he's interested in me and in my welfare of this day. That gave me a lovely moment of truth.
I like the example because, funnily enough, I was at a travel lodge recently as well, and I had something very similar. You made an important point when you were talking about it. You said the thing is that the person has to sound interested in you, and they have to be interested, not interesting.
Yeah.
And actually, in many ways, I suspect that plays well to introverts who tend to listen well, question well, and be focusing on the other person. So actually, there's a really important point in there. So thank you for that one.
Absolutely true. It's not about introvert or extrovert to do this. An introvert can be just as interested in somebody as an extrovert can. If anything, the extrovert has to be careful not to be too interested in themselves.
So in a way, the customer service and the sales experience can be playing towards introverts. You worked in many businesses and consulted with them where they have a secret sales force, whether that's the customer service department or everybody. What tip would you give managers to get more from the introverts, to allow the introverts in the business to be more engaged?
Well, that's interesting because I look at 5 principles to help. And I say that there's 5 principles that the managers must demonstrate respect. They must respect the individual. And the respect goes both ways. They won't be respected if they don't show that respect. Empowerment. That's the second one. If you don't feel empowered, if you don't feel trusted to get on with things, how much effort do you put into anything? Empowerment to me is critical because you want to have a little bit of ownership. You must take responsibility and on occasion put your own neck on the line to make a decision. But you want to feel that you're not just doing, you're not just told do this, do that, then do that, because there's no thought process in there. You're just doing. Empowerment means you're trusted and to get on with things. And it's rather like a good manager would delegate, not abdicate.
Empowerment is one of those words that I've seen bandied around like some magical solution. What do you think people are doing wrong when they're trying to empower staff?
I think they're not empowering them. They're imposing restrictions on them. For instance, let's say that you're in the customer service or in any department, and a customer has a massive problem, a massive complaint that isn't dealt with on the moment. If you are empowered to make the decision to say, hand them out a £10 or a £15 box of chocolates or a bunch of flowers, that can nip something in the bud. Do you have a tiny budget to make a decision by yourself? Or do you have a decision to change management guidelines over something to suit the customer? Maybe the customer says, on this time, but we can't do this until, the manager might say, this can't be done on a Tuesday, we only do this on Fridays. If it really impacts the customer, would you make the decision? Do you feel empowered to make the decision? You know what, this needs doing now, I'll do it, I'll make sure they get it. And it means putting your own neck on the line, that people want to feel empowered to make those decisions.
So empowerment then absolutely critical, and it's something that lots of people get wrong. And again, if you're empowering people, they can go ahead and make those decisions, and that will work particularly well, I guess, with putting some framework around the decision that you're allowing people to make,
Yes.
which therefore works very well for introverts, because quite often they say they don't like being given completely free rein, but being able to make decisions, being empowered to do things within a certain clear guideline,
Absolutely.
really works well for them. If somebody wants to get back in touch with you to talk about the Secret Sales Force, where can they find you?
Steve at stevecatchick.com, and I'll spell that. That is CATCHICK.com. As I say, the thing I want to stress is this is not about direct selling. It's about being the people you want to go to. Or as someone once said, allowing people to buy from you. And being aware, being focused on the other person. And we all have days when we're not, but it's about being motivated, being engaged, being interested in the other person. And the only other factor is communicate. Communicate well, whether you're standing up. And introverts, by the way, make very good public speakers. Learning how to do a sales presentation, which is more about finding the motivation of the customer and what their buttons are, and not forcing slide after slide on them.
That's a really interesting point, though. So sales presentations, introverts, in your experience, tend to be better because they're focused on the audience, not their slides or their own self.
They certainly can be. I'm not saying they always are, but they certainly can be.
Steve, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to see your reviews on the iTunes store. Thank you once again, and catch up with you next week.